Okay. Let's return to a higher place, to a good place, a place that we haven't really been together this year since Purim time. It's been a long time. And it's Stavka this year really would need to be every day for a couple hours. And it's Sirugin in such a way. Hashem should help that we should be able to all have the time and the Yeshiva Das to sit and learn and to be free from Shibud Malchus and to learn the Yeshiva Das and Nuchas and Nefesh. We're on page Pei Beis in our Sefer Das Esfiras, which I told you this Sefer is more of an introduction. I'm going to be filling in with some important hashlamis to what we're learning here. But as I said, we're in the sugya of Keser. Keser, which is it a sphere? Is it higher than the spheres? Is it part of the spheres? The Chilukei, sometimes you'll see Keser being counted as part of the spheres. Sometimes it's above, and then there's Chachma Bina, then you count Das, and so on. What we learned so far is that Keser consists of three moichim, three madregas, three levels of Keser. Motzen, Oineg, and Emunah. Our capacity to want, to have a will, and to experience the deepest Oineg, delight and pleasure, and to believe in the Bari Olam. All of those come from the world of Keser. Now, what each of these mean? What is the meaning of Ratzon? What's the meaning of Einig? What's the meaning of Emunah? So we spoke a little bit about, again, the Sefer is just Reshi Prakim. We spoke a little bit about Ratzon and Einig. And each of these, you can spend the rest of our lives talking. What's the meaning of Ratzon? And what is Einig? And we're now going to begin with Emunah on the bottom of page Pei Beis. And the meaning of, what does that mean, that the capacity that a Jew has to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes from that midah that's called Keser? What does that mean? So before we learn inside, it's important to spend a few minutes, because this is such an important part of who we are in our lives and everything. So it's important to talk a little bit about, to put this into context, to explain a little bit more, so that we get ready to what we're going to be talking about. Emunah, as I've mentioned many times over the years, Emunah of a Jew is not Indian of ideas, or Ashkafa, or Limudim, certain things to learn, even though there's no question that by learning Hashkafa, and by learning Svarim, and by doing mitzvahs, and all the things that we do, we're able to bring a certain energy and a certain or into our Emunah, and we're able to be Makar of the Nefesh Elokis to the world of the Nefesh Bahamas. We're able to bring the Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamas closer to each other and to work together with our learning and our davening and our mitzvahs. But that's not where Emunah comes from. That's not what Emunah is. Emunah is not about what we learn. Emunah is not about mitzvahs. Emunah is the Nakuda, the Nakuda that part of us that wants nothing else but HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We might not be aware of this at all, but there is that part of each and every one of us that wants nothing else in the world and cares about nothing else in the world except HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Zohar Kodesh will sometimes call this Reisha Delo Yada Lo Yisyada, the beginning that we can't understand, we don't know it, it's unknowable. And therefore, there's no way it's humanly possible to define the essence of what this Emunah is. There's no way to define it. But we do know, and we have received this from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and it goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu, that the shorish of this, the root of this reality, that's called Emunah, is in the Keser, is in Keser, in that midah of Keser. And this lo yada, this unknowable, incomprehensible essence of a Jew, is something that is the teva that we received from the Avos and from the Imahos, and therefore we find that another term that's being used in this form when referring to Keser is oneg ne'elam, the hidden oneg, the hidden pleasure, hidden delight. What does that mean? It means that a person is not necessarily thinking about Emunah, might not think about this in a way that's revealed, in a way that's open, but behelem, in a way that we're going to talk about in a minute, in a way that's very, very hidden, this keser, this crown, this Emunah has an effect upon each and every one of us. It's an onig ne'elam, and this onig ne'elam, it wants very desperately to be misgala, to be revealed in our lives. That this Emunah, this nakuda of Yahadis, of who we are, wants desperately to be revealed in our lives. Now, let me explain just a little bit more before we go into the Sefer. How is this midah of Keser, this inyan of Emunah, how is it misgala, even though we can't explain what it is, we don't know what it is, we can't define it. It's lo yisyada, it's not knowable, it's incomprehensible. Nevertheless, it's misgala, it's revealed in our lives in three essential ways. And this is important by way of Hakdama. Aleph. The Tanya in Perek Yud Ches and Yutes speaks about this. That you could have a Jew that his entire life, and I've discussed this many times over the years, we've spoken about this, you could have a Jew that never had any shaykhus to Yiddishkeit his entire life. Never kept mitzvahs, never kept Shabbos, didn't daven, didn't learn, didn't do anything. But there is a force that has come into his life that is seeking to subvert, to destroy his connection to the Jewish people, his connection to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, to somehow be ma'arer, to object to the etzem hanakuda that this Jew feels connected to Hashem and feels connected to the Jewish people, especially if it's a time of there being a shmad. What's happened this past year and a half, almost 2 years, during the time of the Milchama, and the responses and the reactions that we're watching, that we're listening to, that we're reading about, even from Chevra that were hostages and now are free, and from other Chaveris that have fought in the war and so on, and have been part of that, especially when there's an attack against Am Yisrael. And there's this clear reality of Omdim Aleinu L'Chaloseinu, that there is a force that is trying to extinguish the light of the Jewish people, which in the mind of this Jew, even though he's not religious, even though he screams that he's an atheist, that means his connection to Hashem, being part of the Jewish people. That's his connection or her connection to Hashem. So at that moment, when the Jew has to make this choice, and historically it meant that many times Jews were given the opportunity, a chance to convert and save their lives. But when given this choice between being alive, and this strange, undefinable thing inside of him that's called Emunah, that comes from Keser, that the person is prepared to be mevater on his life, to give up his life, rather than being kaifer, rather than denying, or even saying the words that he's not Jewish, or saying the words that he believes in something else, saying any words that will imply that he's not a Jew, if he's cutting himself off from the Jewish people. Now the Tanya really have to learn that very carefully. Yud Ches and Yud Tes says that we see this over time by countless Jews. When it comes to the seichel of Yiddishkeit, they know nothing about it. They don't think about God at all. They don't necessarily think about Am Yisrael. They don't have any feelings about it at all. But because of this attack, because of this attempt on the part of the world to uproot, to cut that person off from the essence of who he is, so that reveals within the person this nakuda hapnimis, this nakuda of emunah, and it reveals something absolutely astonishing, that there's something in him that's more dear to him than being alive. Now we've seen this. There's something that's more important to him than life itself. In other words, to say that I'm not Jewish, or to reject HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to reject Am Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, well, like the stories that we've all read, grew up reading so many stories about this, that the Nazi Yamach Shema wanted this Jew who was the mayor of that town in Poland, and this mayor was doing all kinds of bad things, and he was married to a Goita, and he wasn't so particularly good to the Jewish population of the town. But when the Nazis came and they burned down the shul and they took out the Sefer Torah and they told the mayor to step on the Sefer Torah, he said, "I won't do that." And a million stories like this, and then they shot him, they killed him. And our whole history, unfortunately, is filled with stories like this, where suddenly, in a moment, without understanding anything in Seichel, without knowing what it means at all, the person there's something inside of him that is more important than being alive. And at that moment, life becomes unimportant. And he gives up his life. So that's one way that this midah of Keser, this oinig ne'elam, this unknowable and incomprehensible essence of a Jew, this is one way that it could affect a person when he's being threatened. Otherwise, he goes about his business eating chametz on Pesach. But if it's threatened, if someone's trying to take this away from me, so then it touches that world of the Keser, and if it doesn't, it's something strange. But generally, that we've seen, it will touch that point of Keser in the person, and he's prepared to give up everything. He'll die. That's the first way that it affects us. This nakuda of emunah. The second is from called b'derech hashlila, which in English means by way of negation. What does that mean? By way of negation. So I'm sure that most of you or all of you are familiar with Rabbi Nachman's story of the Hungarian wine, right? Well, you've heard it. I'm not going to go over the whole story. Not that it's one of his long stories; it's a very short story. But the story of the Hungarian wine is in Breslov, and by Chabad, by Hillel Paritcher, there's a story of the song of the niggin. It's the same yisod. The story, of course, is that there's this Yid that he drives a wagon for the pirates, and he usually sits outside in the bitter cold, waiting for the pirates to finish drinking in the bar with all of his friends, because he's not welcomed in. The Jew's not welcomed in, and or he would sit inside and watch them all drinking and so on. And one time the pirates, the guy was in a better mood. Maybe he already had a couple of drinks. And he said to Moshka to have a drink, and it was a kosher place, it was a Jewish-owned place. And as many of the kretsches, many of the bars and the inns were owned by Jews. And there was this very, very expensive bottle of Hungarian wine. It was always considered to be the best wine, where Kerestir is, in that area. Tokai, Kerestir is the best wine. So this poor schlepper was offered to have a drink of Hungarian wine by his boss, by the pirates, who was in a good mood, and the Jew drank from this wine. And as the story Rabbi Nachman told, is that he left this pirates eventually. He went through the world, and wherever he went, and he would have something to drink, and they would bring him something good. He would say, "It's good, but it's not the Hungarian wine." It's not the Hungarian wine. I know what Hungarian wine is, and you can't fool me. And Rabbi Nachman told that story when he said to his chassidim before he left the world that what I wanted to give over to you, I don't think that you were able to completely comprehend. But at least this much I did, is that the world is not going to fool you. And as I gave you a drink of Hungarian wine, and if any of you have ever had a drink of Rabbi Nachman, you know that it's you could spend the rest of your life looking for that taste of Hungarian wine. So, in the story by Rabbi Hillel, it's just the same thing. A person heard the most beautiful niggin, and the rest of his life, wherever he goes, he tells bands. He says, "Hey guys, can you play? What's your favorite niggin? What's your favorite song?" But he can't get that niggin. That song that he heard can never, ever, ever be in his life. He's never able to get that back. So, what that means is that the guy doesn't really remember. In the story of Rabbi Hillel, the guy doesn't remember the niggin. He can't teach it to He can't teach the niggin to the band. He can't sing it over to them. You can't sing the niggin. But he knows with 1,000% certainty that when he hears it, he knows das is das. If he'll hear it again, he'll know what it is. And all the nigunim that he's hearing, and all the great nigunim of the world, and all the fantastic stuff that they play for him, he knows that what? Is a lozeh. That's not it. So the meaning of this is that when the Gemara says in Megillah, "Kol kofer ba'avodah zarah nikra Yehudi." Kol kofer ba'avodah zarah nikra Yehudi. A person who denies avodah zarah is called a Yehudi, a Yid. What this means is that he might not be observant, this person, but because he's a Jew and he received this taste of Hungarian wine, he tasted it in Shemai, by Har Sinai, when everybody was there, all of our neshamas were there. All of us were at Har Sinai, our neshamas were at Har Sinai, and we heard Hashem say, "Anochi Hashem Lakacha, Atar Esadas, Hashem Elokim." Hashem opened up the Shiva Rikim, and we had a taste of Hungarian wine, and we heard a niggin. We heard a Gavaldi niggin. So you could have the Breslov version, you could have the Chabad version. Something happened. And that something that happened makes it impossible for a Jew, even one who dabbles in, even one who tries chas v'chalila, other religions, in the pnimis of who he is, it makes it impossible for him to be able to say, das is das. This is it. This is it. On the other hand, you could take a Yid and just ask him, "Are you Jewish?" and he says, "Okay," and then they put tefillin on him, and then the next thing you know, he's spending Shabbos in his rabbi's house, and das is das. That's the Hungarian wine. Now I remember how the song goes. What's avodah zarah? Avodah zarah is like nowadays it's called pluralism. You ever hear that word pluralism? It means that I taste every wine. It's all the same to me. I taste every wine. All music, all wine, it's all the same. It's gewaldig, this is gewaldig. This is good, that is good, this is good, that is good. Kol kofer b'avodah zarah nikra Yehudi. Ish Yehudi hayi b'shushan abir. And Mordechai says, I'm not bowing down. Mordechai lo yichro lo yishtacheh. I'm not going for any of the phony wine. I'm not going for some other niggin. Because I know what the niggin is. But if you know what the niggin is, then sing it. So we tell this Jew, sing the niggin. So why don't you keep Shabbos? Why don't you keep mitzvahs? He says, I'm not ready for that. My grandparents, I have a picture. Look at a picture of my grandfather. He's got a long beard. So this is my grandfather. So why don't you grow a beard? And why don't you put on tzitzis and daven or something like that and keep Shabbos? He said, okay, look, So he doesn't remember the niggin. But he knows that all the other stuff is not the niggin. So he admires his grandfather. He even reveres, in certain ways, the faith of his ancestors. He says, I identify as a Jew. He feels connected to the Jewish people in a very, very remarkable way. He doesn't know how to keep Shabbos, doesn't remember exactly what that means to live as a Jew, and to connect in a real deep way to the niggin, and to drink of the wine. But he knows, by way of negation, that's called derech shlila, he knows that that's not the wine. What you're serving me is not the Hungarian wine. This business is not the truth. It's not the truth. And that's another way that this somehow this emunah that comes from Keser, where there's a memory that is planted in the DNA of a Jew, in the neshama of a Jew, there is this memory of a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, enough so that whatever else you try to give him, he says, that's not it. What is it? I don't know what it is, but that's not it. So that's called b'derech shlila. This is why I'm called a b'derech shlila. So that's a way that Keser affects the life of a person, even though he doesn't know anything about what emunah is. He doesn't care about emunah. He says he's not even a mammon. Obviously, for a mammon, it affects him in a million ways. We'll talk more about it. But this is the impact. Like I was talking about at the beginning, oneg nelam, the hidden oneg. So when this guy that could be married to a gaita, and he doesn't keep anything, but he says, I'm not going to church with my wife, right? I'm not going to go to church with her. So at that second, there's an oneg nelam. The neshama says, Yankel. He doesn't even know his name is Yankel. He hasn't heard maybe his grandfather once called him Yankel. Everybody else calls him Jack. He's Yankel. And then the neshama says, go, Yankel, go. So I'm not going to church. So, but you want to go to shul? No, I don't do that either. I don't go to shul, but I'm not going to church. I don't do that. So why don't you go to shul? I don't know, it's not for me. Of course it is. But why can't he go to church? It would make his wife happy. It'll keep the family together. The teretz is, because there's an oinig nelam, that the deepest pleasure of the soul is to connect to that emunah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So here, even though he's not being put to death, but he already, since he had this Hungarian wine, before his neshama came into the world, and he heard the niggin, he remembers enough that he can't bring himself to do that. So that's b'derech shlila. And the third is maybe the most interesting. That's the pages that you have in front of you. Let me just introduce it to you, and then we'll read a little bit inside from the Sefer. I'll explain it in a second. The third way that it impacts a person, again, even without knowing it, how? Is a little bit more sophisticated. You remember when we were kids, at some point, we heard somebody ask the question, can God make a stone that he can't lift, right? You ever hear that? Can God create a rock that he can't lift? And that was supposed to make you into an atheist, that question. But apparently it hasn't worked with any of us. So it was supposed to make us into atheists. Because they got you like, how can you answer the question? If God can do anything, then he can make he can make a stone. But then if he can't lift a stone, then... So we have other questions that we can't answer. For instance, b'chira and yediyah, right? Free choice and God's knowledge. The Rambam is smart, we're all maskim. Ashkenaz, man Sephardim, right? The Rambam said, I don't know. We don't know. It's true that there are answers that are given in this farm. The Ravid was very upset about that. But there are answers that are given. But self-maisa, the Rambam was very smart. And even though there are answers, there are madregas of bechira, madregas of yediyah, and you could explain on some level. The Rambam was talking about the Be'etzim. Rabbi Nachman himself also said that the inyan of bechira and yediyah is one of those questions that comes from the chala panui, from the empty space, by the tzimtzum. How is it possible that I have complete and total choice if Hashem knows what I'm going to do, right? So Rabbi Nachman also said that comes from the chala panui. He agrees with the Rambam that it's something which is not answerable. So then how come we're still Jews? Can God create a rock that he can't lift? The teretz is, God can do anything. Because Hashem doesn't follow the rules. He's a noisei hafachim. And that's a term that you might have seen in the Svarim. Noisei hafachim, which Alter Rebbe speaks about in your test, over there he speaks about dying al Kiddush Hashem. Neisef Achim. Tzarech levar heitiv mashakos ne Hashem nishmas Adam. We begin as Chachma shebenefesh sheba or ein soif baruch hu. So there, the Alter Rebbe is explaining that there is this strange paradox in the life of a Jew, that he wants very, very badly to have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He wants to reach a level of Dveikus B'Hashem. But the same way that the candle, the Baal Tanya gives the example, that the candle wants very, very badly to return to its source. That's why it's flickering. It wants to return to its shirish. Nevertheless, it knows that if it does that, then it's going to be extinguished. So it wants something that's against its own existence. So the Baal Tanya explains that Hashem, just as Hashem is Noisei Hafachim, this person wants to have a connection to that which is impossible to have a connection to, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Bli Gvul. Hashem is infinite and he's incomprehensible, right? So on the one hand, it's not possible for me, it's not possible for the human mind, which is mugbal, which is limited, it's not possible for the human mind, which is mugbal, to achieve dveikis, to have a relationship with that which is bilti mugbal, that which is infinite. Because gvul and bli gvul are opposites. Gvul and bli gvul are opposites. So the Baal Tanya says that this impossible paradox, where opposites can somehow go together, can work together, that it's possible for a limited, finite human being to be dovuk to that which is infinite. That comes from Keser. From Keser. It comes from that mitzias, that the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ein Sof, is infinite. And I believe 1,000,000% that Hashem is infinite, and it's impossible for me to comprehend what that means and to know what that means. But the neshama of a Jew believes that somehow the infinite can make himself known to me, who is finite. That the bli gvul can connect to the gvul, which is a paradox. Doesn't make any sense at all. Because if it's bli gvul, it can't enter into a gvul. If it's something which is infinite, the same way with all this, how could it be that from the infinite God came a finite world? How do we have a world? So how do I believe that I have free choice and that God knows what I'm going to do? I don't know. You don't know what's the matter with you. I don't know. But I believe that. But you're an intelligent person. Everything else in your life, you explain rationally and you talk about it in a rational, logical way. Aren't you called the Vilna Gaon? You must be very smart if they call you the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says, no, I don't know. The Vilna Gaon doesn't know this? No. But then, how do you know that can be? That the infinite can enter into the finite? That there can be a relationship between the infinite and the finite? That the bilti mugbal, the bli gvul, can be with the gvul? How do you know that it could be? These two can be together. There could be yediyah, that Hashem knows everything, and you still have bechira? How could that be? How could these two go together? If Hashem is infinite, then how could there be a finite world? If Hashem is infinite, then how can I find any meaning in my finite existence? How could I find any connection to the infinite in my finite existence? And how could that be? So the Teretz is, I don't know. Because it's something which is impossible to know. Therefore the Rambam says, I don't know. It's not possible to know this. And Rabbi Nachman said, no, it comes from the empty space. We don't know. We don't know. How could there be such a thing, that these two opposites? But Hashem is a Noisei Hafachim, and a Jew has this ability from Hashem, because that's the Nakuda that the Alter Rebbe is talking about, the Nakuda of Chachma shebenefesh, Koachma, to be bottled, like the candle to be extinguished. The Neshama has this ability, that a Jew has this ability to live with these paradoxes and to be an Eved Hashem, even though there's no way to explain There's no way to explain how it's possible, how this can work. So that it could be worded in such a way, just as Hashem can create a rock that he can't lift. What does that mean? I don't know what it means, but he can do it. So too, Hashem can the Chelik Elokom, the infinite God, is sitting inside of me right now on this night of Yisroel Chag, post Pesach. Hashem's is sitting inside. What do you mean Hashem is sitting inside of you? Yeah, Shlomo Melech said, how could it be that Hashem is sitting? You want me to build a house for you, a building? How could you have a place? What does that mean to have a house, a building for Hashem? What does that mean? What do you mean Hashwas Hashchin? What does that mean Hashwas Hashchin? What does it mean that if you go to this place? I was just by the oil. What does it mean if you go to the oil and you're there by Kivrei Tzadikim, you're there by Kivrei Tzadikim, and that somehow in this place it's a gewaldige place to go daven, and it's Hashwas Hashchina. But Hashem is everywhere. Yeah, but especially here. What does that mean? What does that mean? We're saying these words. So I'm going to go daven in Meiron. Somebody was talking to me the other day that they had a baby. They promised Rabbi Shimon because they couldn't have a kid, they couldn't have children for a few years, and they promised that if they have a boy, they're going to take him for the upshare. They're going to take him to Meiron for the upshare. So they called me that they had a boy, Baruch Hashem, but it's a problem because the tickets are very expensive. I said, no. I'll get some chaver, will help you out, but you're going to you don't mess with Rabbi Shimon. You said you're gonna take him. The tickets are expensive, and he has some important thing with work. I said, I don't care. You have to get to Meiron. You're going to Meiron for Lag Baimer. You're going to be in Meiron, Mitzvah Hashem. Okay, I just want to check. So no, you have to go. So I have to go to Meiron to get a haircut for my kid. So I told Rabbi Shimon, I said to Hashem, I'm going to do this. Give nachas. If you give me a kid, I'll bring you for a haircut to Rabbi Shimon. So, what does that mean, Bechlal? We're talking about Hashem. This bleak vul. What does that mean? So look at the page you have. That's the pages you have. I mentioned to you once a few years ago, this is a little safer. When I go away, I always take it with me. Not if I go for a day or two, but if I go away for the summer, I take it with me always. Right when I go to Eretz Yisrael, I take it with me. It's called Sefer HaEmunah. Any of you have it? You have it? It's from the Bilvavi. It was one of the earliest from the Bilvavi. Now, the Yemi just gave me yesterday the countries from the Bilvavi on Emunah, which takes a lot of these Yisaitis and develops them. This is one of the earliest for. This is already over 20 years ago. This Sefer HaEmunah. It's a very, very miraculous Sefer. I don't know any other word for it.
Is that the Sefer by the one who wrote Bilvavi?
Yeah. This is from the author of Bilvavi Mishkan Erevna. I don't even know if you can get it anymore. Probably you could print it. It's called Sefer HaEmunah. You have to sit on each piece, and spend a lot of time and work it through. It's a masha. Over the years, he found a way more to how to write that could reach, right. But this is from the earliest form. It's masha. So, on this listing that we just spoke, we'll start it right now. We'll probably finish it next week in Mitzvah. Emunah, the whole sefer is about the different things that, really what we're talking about. How Emunah is manifested in our lives, in our machshavos, in our diburim, in our maisim. What is Emunah? And it's all about the whole sefer is about Emunah, about Keser, about this Nakuda. Hakarach la'achil stiros. Emunah gives the Jew the ability to live a life that's filled with contradictions and paradoxes. Ksiv, it says in Pasuk, Yoishe b'seiser elyon. Okay, we all know the words. The simple pshat the words means that Hashem dwells on high. Probably in English it says something like that. The one who dwells on high. I don't know. Yoishe b'seiser elyon, hidden on high. something like that. But if you look at the word Seser, the word Seser means hidden, right? Something which is nistar is hidden. But there's another word over there. What word do you hear in the word Seser? Huh? Stira. Stira. Stira is a paradox, a contradiction, right? Stira. Yoshe b'Seser Elya. Hashem, we could translate it in other words to say, Hashem who dwells in the highest realm of contradictions and paradoxes. So he explains. See, Yoshe b'Seser Elya, we'll just start. Ubi advarim, shebechinas ha'hisyashvus shel ha'elokus b'libo shel ha'adam. How could it be that in the heart of a boss of Adam, in the heart of a finite boss of Adam, how could it be his yashva shel elokus, the elokus dwells in a person, believer shel Adam, who bechinas seiser, miloshen mistar, miloshen stira. This is the greatest paradox of all. I'm sure you remember that when they brought the Tanya, when the Tanya was first brought to the Bedicheva, so the Bedicheva said a very deep thing. The Bedicheva was looking at it. He probably the way he went through it, the Bedicheva, and he said, "It's an amazing thing that the Mechutanim, it's an amazing thing that the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, was able to put such a big God into such a small sefer, right? Tanya is a small sefer. He said, how did he put such a big Rebbeinu Shalom into such a small sefer? When those words of the Bedicheva was saying was exactly what the Tanya is about. The whole sefer Tanya is about this. About taking the infinite and the Rebbe Tachtonim in this world. What does that mean? So that's what the Bedicheva was saying. How do you take that which is infinite, which is bli gvul, and it sits belibo shel Adam. His yashvus shel elokus belibo shel Adam. That elokus dwells in the heart of a Jew. Belibo shel Adam. Who bechinas seiser. Seis also means a lashon of destroying, right? Listen, Seis Almanas, live nice. It means something that, if you try to understand it, you can't. It'll shatter your mind. You can't, because it's a contradiction. It's something which can be. Who bechinas says that's why it's keser. Keser is something that's worn on top of the head. It means it transcends anything that you could understand. It's higher than the mind. It's on top of the mind, the keser. Miloshen mistar, miloshen stira. Who yisod God of a neira ad l'ma'oi. This is a tremendous yisod. He called mahus ha'amuna, the whole mahus, the very essence of amuna. What amuna is, who hakol la'achil hastiros. That it gives the Jew the ability. Hachil, the same word as yachol, and veichul, it means to contain, to be able to contain, to hold on to steers, contradictions, like Yidiyim Bechira, like Bli Gvul and Gvul. Ki Bli Korach Emunah, without the Korach of Emunah, Klemer Rak B'Korach HaMoichin, if a person just uses Moichin, the intellect, Chachma Bina V'das, or even emotions, but he uses his human faculties. Ef Shalachilas Tiras. The mind and one's mind, one's intellect and one's emotions cannot deal with steers. Can't deal with steers. It doesn't accept. It has to reject one and accept the other. It can't have if the two are opposites. It can't have both. It's either this or that. So Rakbakar Chamoichin, Chacham Bina V'das, Ef Shalachilas Tiras. Kamoichin Mekabim Dover Hamusa, Umuvan, because the mind, the intellect, can only receive that which is comprehensible, that which it can understand. Lakasha yesh stira. But when there's a stira, when there's a paradox, when there's a hafachim, opposites, ein hanefesh hasichlis yichol lekabel u'siyashe b'dover. The nefesh hasichlis, the intellect, cannot accept this and live with it. Ulam, however, mitzad koyach hamuna, shemamin she'eloheim dvorv shal kadosh baruch hu nevi v'chachama. But a Jew who's a mammon and knows that this Indian of, let's say, Yedi and Bechira, or Hashem, or the ability that a Jew has to be dovuk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that this comes to us through Hashem and through his Nevi'im and through Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh, and he believes in Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh and so on. The Kabbalah Dvar al af shesoism. He's able to live with this al af shesoism, even though al af shesoism, even though there's a stira. The one cancels out the other, like in math. They can't go together. This cancels out the other. Like, are you afraid to go to the Museum of Natural History? Because I haven't been there in 50, 60 years. Maybe took the kids once. Because when you walked in, there was a big dinosaur bones. Remember? I don't know if it's still. And they told you that this dinosaur comes from the time, before supercell, before everything, before seasons, before everything. You remember that? It predates all of this stuff. Because our kids can't go further. They don't know history, so that if supercell's like that's history. That's 5 counts history. So this predates supercell. Kids, what? Yeah, this is before supercell. And before Chapanash was a separate store, which I only found out yesterday because one of the kids said they got something for Chapanash, and I happened to talk about that, but they said no, that hasn't been there like in 20 years. So this predates all of that. So you're afraid to take your kid to the Museum of Natural History? Why? Because you're going to see the dinosaur, and the teacher said that the teacher said that the dinosaur comes from, that there were dinosaurs before. It's 1 million years old, and the Torah says it's only 5,785. So how could it be? This is like Yoshua says, right?
Soloveitchik says we can't the concept of time.
Yeah, I know that, but my father never heard of that. And he couldn't care less about dinosaur bones. He said, "Give me some bones. I have some meat on them." But I had that. Yeah, I know. We're smart. So, but the Torah is like this, Eliezer. You don't need that answer, and I don't need that answer. I don't need that answer. And that doesn't do it for me. The same way that the codes, the Bible codes, don't make you into a Jew, and the bones shouldn't turn. And if you're afraid that your kid can't go into that place, or your kid can't go someplace where they're non-religious Jews, or if he lives in a building where there's somebody that's not religious, or there's a girl that doesn't dress properly, that he's ois yid, that his whole Yiddishkeit is gone, it means that his emunah is very weak. It means there's a big problem. It means that his teachers should be embarrassed, and his parents should be embarrassed that your kid can't see a dinosaur without becoming a Machal Shabbos. You know, I'm not putting on tefillin anymore. If they're dinosaurs, I'm done. Or they had, remember on the Regents, so there was a whole tumult, this goes back a long time, because there were questions on the Regents about evolution. So there were Rosh Yeshivas that they told the kids, you can't take the Regents. Because it has the word evolution on the Regents. So that kid's going to, evolution, what's that? It means that El Tazedi was a monkey. Then I can't put on film tomorrow. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing because he's out of touch with his emunah. He's not connected to the nekuda of Chachma Shebenefesh. Chachma Shebenefesh, what that means. Because of course you have to connect to them. You have to talk about them. You have to work on them. You have to be megala the nekuda emunah in the heart. But if you see a dinosaur, that's it. You're finished. You're done. Can't be such a thing. It's a contradiction. Science says that the dinosaurs are 1 million years old. And the Torah says that the world is only Tafshin Peh. So it can't be that one of them is wrong. And they say, well, the dinosaur people have stuff that they have fossils, and they have carbon dating and all the other stuff. What do you have? I just have, my father told me that there's touch and pay. I got a luach from Mealmart. My bank sent me a luach, right? And that's how you know it's touch and pay. That's how I know. Otherwise, I would have lost track of time. But it's touch and pay because my luach says so. But you're an idiot because science says that it's a billion years old and there's stars and all kinds of things and all these things happen and whatever. So you have to come up with some kind of explanation. It's an interesting thing because it's very late, but this was a big spiel. This was a whole thing going on when I was a kid with the science and talk. It's not such an, nobody really cares anymore. As we get closer to Mashiach, but it lost its, no one cares anymore. When I was growing up, all the hak was about science and Torah. All the books and articles about science and Torah. Even Lubavitch already had a whole thing about the age of the universe. And everybody was hacking about this, and everybody was going crazy about this Indian of science. Your kids care about that? They come out with steers. There's a steer. Yoshe B'Seisel means that there's the Nekuda of Amunah, which is before Mashiach comes. The Ikrini now is Amunah, Pshuta. And when a person has that, then there's no, you don't lose any sleep over a dinosaur. You don't lose any sleep over carbon dating or contradictions, Yediyah and Bechira. But God knows what I'm going to do, so then if He knows what I'm going to do, that means I have to do it. What are you talking about? Just go to shul. God knows what you're going to do. He knows you're going to go to shul. He knows I'm going to go to shul. So what does He say? He says, I'm not going to shul. God knows that? Yeah, because I'm not going. You go to shul. And then it turns out that God knew that you would go to shul. But how could that be? So, that's the Nekuda of Chochmah Shebenefesh. That the soul of a Jew is able to be noisei hafachim, is able to carry contradictions. That's what he's talking about. And that's called Yoshe B'Seiser Elyon. That Hashem dwells in the heart of a Jew. And that very dwelling place of Hashem, the very fact that God dwells in our hearts is a Seiser Elyon. It defies anything that we could possibly understand and explain. It's Yoshe B'Seiser. You don't have to think about it in the universe. Just it. Yoshe B'Seiser Elyon. It's a stira. Not only it's a Seiser Elyon. The highest stira in the world is what? That the infinite God is Yoshe B'Seiser, is right here. How could there be such a thing? The intellect and emotions cannot address that question. So what he's explaining, what Rav is explaining is that comes from the Kesher, comes from the Emunah. That's the only place that's the only way that we could even talk about such a thing. That's where the Diburim begin. Right, we'll finish this piece. Try to bring the pages with you next time.
If anybody wants to hold on to that.
Yeah.